Tonight, cleaning up the damage after a dramatic downpour.
It was a crazy storm. I've never seen it rain that hard.
Severe weather pummels the region, submerging streets and toppling trees. We'll take you to the hardest hit areas.
We're going to move forward with this. We're going to move forward rapidly.
Committing to cooling, the Premier's new push after CBC Toronto exposes unbearable heat inside long-term care homes. And the adorable pups eyeing a future as guide dogs. Good evening, I'm Chris Glover. We begin tonight with the severe weather this afternoon. So intense, Environment Canada even issued a tornado watch for Toronto. In the end, no reports of twisters in the city, but heavy rain and high wind certainly left a path of destruction. Our Talia Ricci joins us live now from near High Park. And Talia, this was a busy evening for city crews.
That's right. The tree that Hydro is working on behind me was one of many. The city said they actually got around 1,500 calls between 2 and 6, and many of those were related to the storm. A lot of the issues were around power outages and damage from trees falling and flooding. And the city said that more than half of those calls came from the West End, and that's where we went today.
So this stuff came from the basement because we had to use it to soak up a lot of water because the basement was just drenched.
Keith Fraser had to work just as hard and fast as the storm rolled in to clean up his flooding basement.
Within 15 seconds, the water was just flowing. Yeah, knocked our hose or our drainage down, and then just felt water just spewing out, and it just kept going.
Toronto Hydro says some of the damage around the city was quite extensive. Many took to social media to share views from their neighborhoods. Cars halfway underwater, streets looking more like rivers, and water pouring into a parking garage. This car isn't in good shape either, and Luis Ramirez hasn't even owned it for a week.
And when did you buy that car?
It's Sunday.
And just up the street, more trees down.
I've never seen it rain that hard for that long. It was about 20 to 30 minutes of just nonstop downpour, and then it turned to hail. And the tree in the front yard here was basically at a 45-degree angle. Parts of this tree floated down this way, blocked up the sewer grate, and so actually our street was under about that much water.
Oddly enough, it was exactly 7 years ago today when a month's worth of rain fell in a few hours, stranding commuters, filling subway stations, and leaving tens of thousands without power. Climatologists back then said it was one of the wettest days in the city's history. Tonight, Toronto Hydro says it's prioritizing emergencies like trees that have hit power lines. Mayor John Tory thanked workers today.
May I say thank you to the city staff, to the police, fire, and Hydro for their efforts in dealing with today's flooding. It's the latest severe summer storm.
For those working from home in a heat wave, it's going to be a long night.
I have no Wi-Fi, no internet, no power. So you mean like when you're working from home, it's kind of hard because you can't do any work right now. So having no AC, and I'm actually my room's in the very top of the house, so the heat on the roof is super hot.
Now, Toronto Hydro has made quite a bit of progress. At the peak, there were around 4,500 homes without power, and that number is now below 2,000. But there could still be some homes that won't see power until tomorrow morning. But Chris, Toronto Hydro says it's all hands on deck tonight. There's obviously quite a bit of cleaning up to do.
Yeah, and you can see some of that work behind you now. Thanks, Talia. So Hydro crews were hard at work today. Same story for our Colette Kennedy tracking the wild storm. Colette?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, what a busy day today. Of course, the tornado watch, we were in for that brief spell this afternoon with that very strong cell pushing through the city. But some other things, too. I mean, this date in history, back in 2013, we had 126 millimeters of rain that came through. So this isn't a particularly good date for Toronto. And, you know, the other thing, this was our 7th day in a row where we had a temperature of at least 30 degrees reported at Pearson, 30 or warmer. And that time ties us for second place for the longest string. It ties us with, in fact, it's happened in 3 other decades. But if you're willing to kind of compare apples and oranges a little bit, meaning it's still in Toronto, but a little closer to Scarborough, well, that reporting station, back in 1936, there was a string of 11 days where the temperature was over 30 degrees. Well, in fact, there were 3 days in that string of 11 days where it was actually 40 degrees or warmer. So, we know it's been hot. That carries on, and our heat warning carries on, and we get more relief coming where the temperature's going to drop down a little bit after a cold front goes through Friday, and that'll bring our temps down into the weekend a little bit, and some more widespread rain showers moving in that we need to kind of spread it around a little bit with the rainfall. So our heat warning, there it is. It prevails with a few more days where we're going to hit that 30-degree mark or warmer. Yeah, we may get up to number 1 by the time we get to the end of the week and not tied for second. These are your daytime highs then from today. I know that cell that it moved through, it dropped that temp back down into the 20s, but for a time we were there up towards 32 degrees. Now, we do have the clear skies through the overnight hours, the quieter conditions. We will have mostly dry and sunny conditions tomorrow. Now, a few isolated cells may pop up tomorrow, probably not as many as what we saw today, and not as much active weather. But it's a little more organized what's going to be coming through on Fridays. We actually have a cold front that'll be moving through as it presses through the day and then reaching towards the GTA later on towards the evening hours. As that goes through, that's when we get into Saturday again, a little bit more widespread, and the temperatures coming down so that highs will be in the upper 20s. Overnight into southwestern Ontario, those are the numbers. You're kind of getting used to these kinds of readings for your overnight lows. And then for tomorrow afternoon, these are your highs. Humid X value, check that out, 43. Only isolated cells likely there, if anything, tomorrow afternoon. Tonight, overnight, lows around 20 to 23. Tomorrow afternoon, mid-30s, again, feeling like about 40 through the GTA. And this is what I mean by the numbers coming down there as we go into the weekend. Yes, we need the rain, so that's okay. We're going to be okay with that into the weekend. Cooler into Monday. It's after that, Chris, so into next week, those temps are going to be coming right back up again.
All right, we'll be ready. Thanks, Colette.
The weather is brought to you by Trane, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
And with more sweltering heat in the forecast, a promise from the Premier today. Doug Ford committed to mandating air conditioning in the bedrooms of long-term care homes.
We're going to move forward with this. We're going to move forward rapidly. We're going to make sure that the common areas right now within the bill, it says common areas are air conditioned. But just imagine someone sitting up in a third-story room. I know how this works. Believe me, I've been in these long-term care homes. And sometimes they don't have an opportunity to bring these patients, especially now, into these common areas.
So right now, the rule in Ontario is that there has to be a designated cooling area for every 40 residents, but air conditioning is not mandatory in long-term care homes. Ford says his government is already looking at how the law can be changed to ensure cooler temperatures in the bedrooms. The new effort comes after a CBC Toronto exclusive story last night that highlighted sweltering conditions at Woodbridge Vista Care community. Staying with provincial politics and a new piece of sweeping legislation. The Ford government says it's needed to help with the economic recovery from the pandemic. But the opposition says it's smoke and mirrors. Mike Crawley walks us through it.
So this is called the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. So it is supposed to be about economic recovery. And the government does say that some of the provisions are about reducing regulatory costs for businesses. But it's one of these things that's called an omnibus bill. So there's a lot in it. And some of the provisions, at first glance, don't seem to have anything particularly to do with economic recovery. For instance, one of the provisions would change the way that justices of the peace are appointed. There are 20 different pieces of legislation that would be changed here, including how Ontario does environmental assessments. And Premier Doug Ford says that's because environmental assessments are taking too long.
We're losing jobs, and we aren't going to make sure that we aren't going to dodge EAs or anything. We're going to make sure we strengthen them, but we're going to do them quicker and smarter. Do you know that the environmental assessments hasn't changed in 50 years?
So right now in Ontario, all projects of a certain size must go through an environmental assessment unless Cabinet grants an exemption. The change would reverse that so that projects only have to have an environmental assessment if Cabinet orders one. And the NDP leader, Andrea Horwath, says she's concerned that the government is trying to push through its agenda and using the pandemic as cover.
It doesn't help families. It doesn't help devastated long-term care homes, doesn't help small businesses, doesn't help schools and daycares, doesn't help First Nations or municipalities to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic.
And Horwath says she believes the changes would gut Ontario's environmental assessment legislation. Mike Crowley, CBC News, Toronto.
Starting Friday, masks will be mandatory in indoor public spaces in Brampton and Mississauga.
The decision was made to protect the health of all our residents. And frankly, if we want to see businesses reopen, if we want to get to stage 3, this was an integral step if we want to continue to get the numbers down.
As part of the move, Brampton announced it will hand out 1 million masks throughout the city, and it'll be mailing 3 masks to every household. Like other regions, there are some exceptions, but those individuals and businesses not following the bylaw could be fined from $500 to $100,000. Brampton and Mississauga join several other regions around the GTA in making the move. Toronto's bylaw came into effect yesterday, and Durham's bylaw will also take effect on Friday. Now to speeding up a rapid transit plan in Toronto. The city is fast-tracking bus-only lanes on some major streets.
Our plan is to get started right away on the design with a plan for the Eglinton East priority bus lane to be in place by this fall, September of 2020.
The plan piggybacks off an earlier proposal released by the TTC last December. It identified 5 corridors that would benefit from priority bus lanes. In addition to Eglinton, they are Jane Street, Steeles West, Dufferin Street, and Finch East. The city says the bus-only lanes will improve speed, reliability, and capacity. To Scarborough now, and firefighters say a man is lucky to be alive after falling over the edge of the bluffs overnight. His cries for help were heard by a person passing by just before 7 this morning after he'd been dangling on the side of the ridge for 5 hours. Toronto Fire found the man caught in some branches 8 meters down. They performed what's called a high-angle rescue, and the man was taken to the hospital with only a broken ankle. Firefighters perform these rescues several times a year at the Bluffs, mainly because people ignore the warning signs. As we told you first last night, Mike McCormick is stepping down as head of the Toronto Police Union. So now that's both he and the chief of police leaving their jobs. The major departures come as the Police Services Board heads into a series of community town halls starting tomorrow. Lorenda Redekop explains the volatile time for policing.
The calls for major change have been loud, and now both the police chief and the head of the police association are leaving their roles.
This is just change in leadership. This is not structure. We don't care who comes and goes. It does not matter. It does not change the dynamics because it is not individuals who are the problem.
This longtime activist says the issues are systemic. And since City Council has already voted against cutting the police budget by a minimum of 10% for next year, she does not plan to speak at the town hall.
We are not going to get what we actually asked for. Those town hall meetings were just to a performative, would be all a performance. It will just be an enactment. There will be no shift and change.
I understand their cynicism.
City Councillor Josh Matlow says the consultations weren't initially going to happen, but given the many calls for reform, he believes change will come.
I'm hearing from police officers that they're not youth workers. They're not social workers. They're not nurses. They want to be police officers, but they also recognize that they shouldn't be doing everything they're tasked to do.
Matlow is frustrated council approved buying police body cameras, meaning more funding for police, not less. He says a shift for police could come with a new head of their association.
I hope that the police association doesn't just continue to fight to have the police budget go up and up and up, but that the new president wants to be part of looking at how to best support the community and, you know, not fight every possibility of actually making community safety look better.
The police board says the town hall discussions will look at police accountability, reform, and community safety. It says 360 people are scheduled to speak over 4 days and calls that response unprecedented. Others can still give their thoughts either in writing or in an audio or video submission. The deadline for that is Friday. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
When we bought it, we were kind of blown away that we were going to be owning and operating such an iconic space.
Fast forward a few years, and now they have put the Rivoli up for sale. How much the iconic bar would set you back, and a look at the famous faces who have made the venue so special. That's all coming up after the break. Welcome back. After months of COVID-19 lockdown and the arrival of summer, people across Toronto are flocking to parks. There are places to connect with friends or just get some much-needed outdoor time. But a CBC News analysis of the city's parks has found not everyone has easy access to green space. Nicole Ireland explains.
Remember this? The sight of Torontonians jamming into Trinity Bellwoods Park raised alarm about the spread of COVID-19, prompting city officials to map out circles to help people stay physically distanced. But it also showed just how much people crave green space. For those living in neighborhoods like Trinity Bellwoods or High Park, it's not hard to find. But in many other parts of the city, that patch of green is much tougher to come by. The area with the least amount of green space per capita is the densely populated North St. Jamestown, where most people live in apartment buildings. There are only a handful of parks in the neighborhood, like this one.
I would create more of them. I would make them a little bit more beautiful so people get a little bit more out of them. Because it really helps with mental health when you have a beautiful space to be around in.
Access to green space is a big problem in other areas of the city, too. Using public data, CBC News determined that in almost 40 out of 140 neighborhoods, the amount of green space per person is less than the size of a parking spot.
Having access to parks nearby is actually very, very important as a public health strategy for the city.
Faisal Mullah is an expert in green space and public health. He says having access to meaningful green space can improve both physical and psychological well-being. But with housing, transit, and other infrastructure needs competing for limited space, parks tend to fall to the bottom of the list, so it's vital to find creative solutions.
The first thing to remember is that parks are not the only type of green space that we interact with on a daily basis. There are street trees, for example. There are community gardens.
But those don't replace the need for parks, he says, in densely populated areas, something the City of Toronto Parks Department says it's working on right now.
People are using parks as an extension of their daily living space because 90% of the city's growth is happening through condominiums that are high-rise. And so having that extension and having that space is really important for quality of life.
The city says that includes more parkland for St. Jamestown, where it's planning to convert the top of an underground parking garage into green space. Nicole Ireland, CBC News, Toronto.
For nearly 4 decades, the Rivoli has been a hit spot on Queen West for comedy, concerts, or to grab a drink and shoot some pool. But now it's up for sale. Greg Ross takes a look behind the curtain.
If only the walls at the Rivoli could talk, they'd have plenty of stories to tell, although they are decorated with photos that have captured some of the bar's greatest moments.
What's the story behind this picture?
So that's a picture of Amy Winehouse.
For the past 6 years, Jessica McCarty and Jenna Wood have been co-owners of the Rivoli. They say they're still in awe of its history.
That picture is Adele when she played that first show.
On the Rivoli stage, yeah.
Whether they came to perform or just hang out, some huge names have passed through the doors.
That was a real hotbed of talent. I mean, Kids in the Hall, Drake had been there, Gord Downie had later performed there. There was a big comedy scene happening at the club.
It opened for business in 1982, right around the time a young Mike Myers was cutting his teeth on the Toronto comedy scene, and he was able to find some inspiration at the Rivoli.
When Mike Myers was on Saturday Night Live, he had a character named Dieter.
Brackets made me dance.
Apparently, Mike Myers, who was a regular at the Rivoli, based that character of Dieter on a waiter that he encountered a bunch of times at the Rivoli.
Nearly 40 years later, Myers still pops by when he's in town.
The first time that he came by, we were all just standing there being like, is that Mike Myers? Is that Mike Myers? But he's like lovely. He came and he sat and he had a drink with us.
While McCarty and Wood say the COVID-19 pandemic has been tough on business, that's not ultimately what made them decide to sell. It's something they say they've been thinking about for a while. Now they're hoping whoever does decide to buy it keeps its tradition alive.
We would never want to see Toronto lose such an iconic venue. And it's a precarious time for venues in general.
To lose the Rivoli would be a bad one because Toronto has already lost a number of music venues over the last couple of years we can't really afford to lose more. I mean,
McCarty and Wood don't own the building, so that's not for sale. They're looking for someone willing to buy the business and its assets, along with the lease and all of that history, for about $500,000. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
After the break, it was a big day for these 7-week-old poodle pups as they started their journey as future guide dogs. More on that coming up. Welcome back. If you're looking for a way to give back, here's an idea for you. Foster a puppy on a journey to become a service animal.
It's for a good cause. So we come back and see their graduation, the dogs graduate, and we see who they're partnered with, so that makes us feel really good, and it's all worthwhile.
But it's not all fun and games for these foster families. They will also have to train these 7-week-old puppies on obedience skills and make sure they are fully socialized. The puppies will then return back to the Lions Foundation at about 1 year old and begin formal training in one of its 7 programs, including canine vision, hearing, and autism assistance. The outdoor send-off will be accompanied with weekly video calls from the organization, making sure all the trainees have exactly what they need. Very cute. Before we go, as everyone starts rethinking how to spend their summer holidays during the pandemic, some Belgians are taking things to a whole other level. Okay, so that is a tent hanging from a tree. These teardrop-shaped tents also double as art installations. They were originally designed in the 90s for environmental activists who were camping near trees in an effort to stop deforestation. Now, this unusual experience is a popular local tourist attraction. I'd check that out for sure. And that is our show for you tonight. Dwight Drummond has your next local newscast, and I will be back here with you again tomorrow night. See you then. Good night.